Welcome everybody to Trauma Training Tuesday. So excited to see you here. There's so many friends here, people that have direct experience with this, people that are impacted by this. Um, I want to give a special shout out to Josh, working for Senator Kennedy these days, and has always been a community leader in civic engagement. Sandy Ellis, dear friend, Rachel Lapointe, national expert on police sexual violence. Rachel, TikTok famous, social media famous, big deal. Margot, also so involved in all of this stuff. Gordon currently has a lawsuit against the WPD. Kara, the talented, beautiful, and amazing Kara Powers, formerly on the Human Rights Commission like a decade ago when we were doing all the same things. Melanie, hi. Ashley Springs here. She herself has had a lot of experience with the Worcester PD, not positive experience. And so I'm so sad about all the things that bring us here today. Tara, hi. Oh, sorry. This is so delightful for me to see that people keep showing up, that people care, people that I care about care. It's really heartwarming, and I'm just going to squeeze the joy any place I can find it. So thank you for indulging me in the moments of joy to see your beautiful faces. Um, our hosts today are Bill Gardiner, longtime friend of Worcester Addresses Childhood Trauma, community rock star, and Roberto Diaz, the executive director of Worcester Interfaith. Worcester Interfaith has also been prominently placed in these conversations for a long time. We're so thrilled to have both of them here, as well as many experts in our audience. I am going to share screen and turn it over to Bill and Roberto. Is there anything else? Kelsey's my beautiful co-lead. Kelsey is going to be working in the chat to make sure that people are heard there. I think Bill and Roberto will give instruction about how they want to handle conversation and questions. And I think that's all from me. Sound all right?
Thank you, Amy. Welcome, everybody. I'd like to start by introducing who Worcester Interfaith is, briefly who I am, and then definitely inviting Bill to introduce himself. So Worcester Interfaith, we are a grassroots, multiracial, multi-faith organization founded way back in '93 by faith leaders and mostly people in their congregations, committed to building community power and advancing racial and economic justice. Since 2017, we helped, win major policy changes, including a Fair Share Amendment, the Work and Family Mobility Act, police reform, and voting rights lawsuit that changed Worcester Schools Committee, how Worcester Schools Committee is elected. Since 2022, we have rebuilt our membership, trained more than 100 resident leaders, connected with nearly 10,000 Worcester voters through relational organizing and voter engagement. And we see every campaign and voter contact as an opportunity to develop leaders, build relationships, and sort of organize Worcester residents to create lasting change. A little bit about myself, and I'll be super brief. My name is Roberto Diaz. I'm the executive director of Worcester Interfaith. I've been organizing for over 4 years, building on more than 32 years of providing services, advocating for, mobilizing youth in Worcester, including work with the 2% of youth impacted by gun and knife violence in the city, predominantly with Maine South youth. I bring a deep commitment to developing leaders, building community power and turning lived experience into collective action. I'm also a son, a big brother, a husband, a mentor, a proud girl dad whose baby just turned 21 yesterday. And so I'm beginning to be an old man as well. Now I'd like to invite Bill to share his credentials.
Next slide, Amy. There we go. Thanks, Roberto. My name is Bill Gardiner, everyone, and I have been a leader at Worcester Interfaith for about 4 years now. I've been living in Worcester for the last 56 years. I am a photographer by trade, having a camera in my hand since I was just 8 years old. I am also a disabled and retired Worcester police officer. I was disabled due to being bullied and verbally assaulted for the better part of the 10 years that I was on the job, starting in the police academy. My style of policing, working with and not against the community, was not well received by the department. So for the better part of the last 32 years, I have been working on improving the relationships between our local police and the community. Go ahead, Amy.
But I want to get into some of the things that we will be discussing today and what you're going to come away with. So by the end of the session, you should have a better understanding of a few things. So one, what a civilian review board actually is, understanding of why civilian oversight is different from police internal investigations or police monitoring other police, have a general understanding of what powers the CRB needs to be meaningful. Bill will get into some of that. We'll also have a better understanding of accountability as a community power issue, not simply a policy or police policy issue. And then finally, feel a lot more ready. We hope that you all will feel a lot more ready to take action, hopefully at City Council this evening, and continue organizing beyond this meeting because it's going to go beyond this. So I wanted to begin today as we're talking about CRBs, but really, we're talking about a bigger question, which is, who has the power to hold the police accountable? We're not just here to learn a definition. We're here to think about what accountability actually looks like. And it would, what it would take for us, Worcester residents, to have a meaningful voice. And here are the 5 questions that we'll be answering, right? So what is a civilian review board? Why is a CRB important for accountability measures with the WPD? What is the difference between a CRB or Internal Affairs Division, or as Worcester calls it, their Bureau of Professional Standards? Did I get that right, Bill?
Yep.
Good. And what can we do to build a strong CRB? And 5th question, what powers does the CRB need to hold the Worcester Police Department accountable? So by the end of today, we want you to be able to answer these questions for yourself, not just repeat something from this presentation. And so next slide, and I'd like to turn it over to Bill.
Thanks again, Roberto. We always like to start at Worcester Interfaith with community agreements. A lot of the times it's a matter of us sitting around a room, and we have usually a set of 8 or 9 or 10, and then we had people add to them. Today will just be brief and very simple. We want to establish a few agreements of how we'll be together in this collective space. We acknowledge that this conversation can bring up strong feelings. Some of us may have had positive experiences with police. Some may have had very different experiences, and still others may have experienced both. Our job isn't to erase those differences. Our job is to listen, learn from one another, and figure out what we can organize around together. And that's our ultimate goal. So we're asking everyone today to just do 4 basic things, which are assume the best of everyone, believe others have good intentions, respect diversity, honor each identity, and speak from your own experience. 3rd, be present and show up as your true self. So be fully present. We all have a lot going on out there, but try and be 100% here. We also ask that you be honest with yourself and each other. And finally, we ask you to be authentic. Lastly, we ask that you honor confidentiality. There will be lots of stories that potentially will be told. We ask that what is said here stays here. However, feel free to take the message from what is said that you learned with you, leaving the story behind. Another thing we want to note is that some of the conversation may be triggering to some, so please take care of yourself as you see fit. So that being said, I want to ask the group, is there anything else we need from each other to have a productive conversation today? Feel free to drop any notes in the chat, other things you might want to add to a communal agreement. Let's see what we
Bill, I just want to say this is being recorded, and it will be shared on YouTube and on our website. And so if I just want people to know that, to be transparent about that. If there is something shared, I don't want people to be surprised when things come back on. Like, we cannot guarantee your confidentiality because this is going to be out there in the world.
Sure, sounds like a plan. And I don't see anything additional in the chat, so we'll move right along. Just remember that if tension does come up, don't rush to fix it. Maybe just pause, acknowledge it, and bring the group back to the agreements, and just listening, respecting, learning, and organizing together. Okay, next slide, Amy.
All right. So we want to start with some storytelling just to see how some of us got here. And so I wanted to share a little bit about me. I'm originally from Borinquen, or Puerto Rico, as some call it now. And I just wanted to before we get into structures and definitions, just a little bit about how I've gotten to where I'm at, and then how it relates to this issue. And so when I got here, I was in 3rd grade. I was an ESL student. I met my best friend in the whole world, Jairo Tavares. And what united us was, the need for safety. And so for him, he was able to kind of tell me, hey, if you go to this neighborhood, this is like what you probably don't want to wear. This is like who hangs out in that area. This is what may happen. There are things that, like, maybe you don't want to be saying, and certain things. We also shared the fact that we had, single mothers, and we had the whole, like, thinking of man of the house kind of thing. We had to grow up early and be responsible early. But, by 14, him and I would have conversations about a goal that we had, and our goal was to make it to 25. We weren't certain. We didn't feel safe. The gang task force had just started. I didn't feel safe around them. They would harass us, and by I don't know if it was written or something that they understood as being law, but if 2 or 3 young people in 1994 were together, we would consider it a gang. And so there was a lot of targeting and a lot of things that just weren't good. And, as it relates to us, Jairo wanting to make it to 25, like, it was really about that. Like, there was so many gangs, way more division than there are now. And we just thought, maybe we catch a stray bullet or like that. We definitely thought that maybe a police officer might kill us and end our lives. And so, at that time, I also started to go to a place that saved my life, which is the YMCA on Main Street. And then I saw what happened to kids like my best friend Jairo, who didn't. And so some of them joined gangs. Some of them, ended up dead. Some of them are in jail to this day. Some of them are on drugs, but a lot of them just started to do things and be involved with things that weren't the things that I was involved with. Then, it was important for me to be at the Y. They helped me to kind of develop as a young person and gave me male role models, all that kind of stuff. But the important part was that I earned the scholarship that they offered, and I went to school. And as I was going to school was when things really hit the fan. And by my sophomore year, Jairo was gone. And so 6 years before that, at 14, we were saying, hey, like, man, it'd be great for us to make it to 25. And at 20 years old, my best friend was gone. And so for me, this is a very real issue, because as soon as that happened, I went from wanting to teach 3rd graders, right, in my community, to wanting to work with mostly gang-involved youth, and youth that felt unsafe, like Jairo did, like I did, like our friends did, and just felt that, like, I didn't have to feel that way, especially about police. I shouldn't have to feel scared all the time. Jairo shouldn't have felt what he felt, and our best friend who witnessed it shouldn't have felt what he felt either. And so that really drove me to want to start working in community. And so it led to a career of 32 years almost working with mostly young people in those situations. But I bring that up to say that the beginning of my fear, that stuff, was really about police and how they treated us, because the people that were meant to keep us safe, I didn't really feel safe about. I still have trauma over it now. They started keeping those blue lights on, like, that's trouble for me. Like I see that sometimes and I still freeze up. I start clenching my fist on the steering wheel, right? Like, and so there's a level of things there that like that Pyro was a huge part of us dealing with it together. But that was a major moment in my life though, and so I don't want it to seem like it's just like a dreary thing because it also led to a beautiful um, career of working with young people that I know for sure didn't feel all of the things that maybe Hiram felt. And so with that, I want to turn it over to Bill so he could talk about his story as well.
Awesome. Thanks again, Roberto. As I mentioned earlier, I am a photographer by trade. My first camera actually came out of a bubblegum style vending machine when I was just 8 years old. I never developed the film from my little spy camera, but I was bitten by the bug and wanted to have a camera in my hands all the time. Once I got to high school at Worcester Academy, I joined the photo club there and ultimately became the photo editor of the school newspaper and assistant photo editor of the school yearbook. I had my camera in my hands almost as much as my books on campus, and I just knew that I was going to go to college and major in photography. My plan was to go to Rochester Institute of Technology, Rochester being the home of Kodak, and that university has so many different photography majors. That was going to be my spot. But my mother had different ideas, and her son wasn't going to major in photography. In her mind, there was no money in it. It wasn't guaranteed. One of my cousins had tried it but failed at it. So I had to think of something else. And at the time, 1982 was the year that the Apple II desktop computer had just been released, one of the first commercial personal computers. And I could see the magic in it then. There was going to be one of these on every desk, in every business, and in every home before long. And I was great at building things, Legos, Lincoln Logs, erector sets, and Tinker Toys. Those were my favorite things to play with. So, maybe I can build computers. So not understanding that involved a lot of math and logic and programming, math I was not very strong in. I went to college to be an electrical and computer engineer. I got A's in all of my classes, with the exception of calculus and chemistry my freshman year. And by the time sophomore year came around, those kinds of classes were even harder. Calculus 2, digital logic design, a programming language or APL. I just wasn't doing well, and the writing was on the wall. And so I left the engineering school, transferred into arts and sciences, trying to figure out where I belonged. I even tried designing my own major at one point, but had difficulty getting that approved. Fast forward to 5.5 years later, I had 124 credits, but no specific degree program. You only need 120 credits to graduate, but mine were pointed in like 3 or 4 different directions. And feeling a little burned out, I'd left school. I came home and began to look for work. I would postpone, college for now. But once I was home, I couldn't get certain jobs because I had no degree. Some people wouldn't hire me. Others told me that because of how smart I was, I would never stay working in a warehouse, for example. So they wouldn't even hire me. Never heard of that before in my life. So I temped for a couple of years and was the first one hired, last one fired in any job that I went on because of my work ethic, it being so strong. So after doing this for a few years, I ran into a larger than life Black Massachusetts state trooper. It's Al Toney, for anyone who knows the Toney family. He told me that as long as I passed the test and got hired, they would give me all the training that I needed. So I went out and took the test. I got a 98 on the civil service exam. I got a 95 in the state police exam, and I just waited. And after spending 2 years at WPI Campus Police, I was called up to start the Worcester Police Academy. That was April 4th of 1994. Not long after the academy started, it became immediately clear that I wasn't wanted there. And I began to be verbally assaulted by my fellow cadets. They didn't like the way that I answered questions on tests. always defaulting to the law and caring about people first before looking at their crime or their call for service. It was relentless. And in one situation, going over a criminal law exam, I was called a fucking know-it-all from the back of the room because I got a faulty question right that no one else in the class got, and the academy staff decided to keep it in. And of course, they mentioned this situation, and I was ostracized for it. It only got worse after that, and by the time that I graduated and hit the streets, there were already officers that didn't like me and didn't want to work with me because they had heard about my character. I began to be, shunned by many members of the department, and again, verbally assaulted on a regular basis. One time I was trying to create a diversion program with the juvenile court with the help of a very progressive judge, Judge Louis Perez, really great judge. We would identify young Black and Hispanic youth that weren't getting into serious trouble yet in front of the courts, but wanted to, and he wanted and we wanted to be able to get them to someplace different than just having them be adjudicated by the court. So we would run them through a 12-week program where 3 other officers and we were all in the bicycle patrol together, would teach them about good health and physical fitness over 12 weeks. And one day I walked into the service division and was immediately accosted by a lieutenant who said, "If I had known you were going to have those fucking kids in our building, I would never have paid my gym dues. You do too much social work. That's what your problem is. Too much social work and not enough police work." And another time I was met by another lieutenant who said, "I've had 8 or 9 officers come to me and ask not to work with you. They don't feel like you will back them up if necessary. You're too liberal," he said. "You need to take a look at your liberal attitude, become a little more aggressive." Well, I knew what that meant even without an interpreter. The guys on the street didn't trust me to keep my mouth shut if they had to get heavy-handed with someone and we all needed to stick to a story together. Another time, I also began to be called a gang leader because I started volunteering down at the Worcester Youth Center, a place where mostly Black and Hispanic youth could drop in and participate in activities and educational programming, all geared towards keeping them involved in more nurturing pursuits and off the streets with nothing to do. Very soon thereafter, I started to suffer from what I later found out was severe depression, hyperanxiety, post-traumatic stress, and obsessive compulsive behavior. I laid on the couch much of my 2 days off, doing nothing but eating and watching television. I had extreme gait wane. I started to lose interest in being in public spaces where I didn't know anyone. And I began to self-isolate. I was all of a sudden quick to anger or having fits of crying for no reason at all. I still do to this day, 32 years later. And suicidal ideation has become a real thing in my life, and it frankly scares the hell out of me. After reporting to the department that I was struggling and needed help, I was placed on administrative leave, had my personal and duty firearms taken away from me along with my license to carry, and had to start trying to save my job, eventually being fired, then rehired after threats of arbitration, and then cheated out of my full disability retirement of 72% that I should have been awarded after passing a state medical board with flying colors. I was coerced into signing a 25% personal medical disability by the union lawyer and then abandoned by him, wanting to now be paid out of pocket, something he didn't tell me until after I signed this agreement. He wanted a $2,500 retainer and was going to start charging me $250 an hour. I went from making almost $4,000 a month to only $950 a month. So that was no longer an option, and I had to give it up. I began to have trouble paying my bills, now being underemployed due to my disability. And eventually my home of then 5.5 years was illegally foreclosed on. That has turned into a battle to not be evicted for the last 16 years. And there's no sign of it ending anytime soon that we can tell. I actually have to go back to court tomorrow. So my life is now a living nightmare. I don't really enjoy life anymore. I literally just push through it every day and I'm kind of just robotic about it. And the things that used to bring me joy are not very effective anymore, frankly. And it begs the question, if the police department did all of this to me, what are they doing to the public? Berto, I throw it to you.
Thank you, Bill, for sharing and for being vulnerable with us. I want to ask y'all, yeah, to what Bill said, now that you've heard our stories, we want to ask you all, what did you hear in those stories? I'd like to open it up. Please come off mute.
Don't be
Bill's
shy.
story tracks with what's going on right now. Like, I feel like, I know Bill, and I know that he really does like to kind of color inside the lines, do what's asked of him, meet the expectations, and that fear you express, that like your colleagues are going to expect you to back them no matter how wrong they are, is exactly what the problem is right now. Like, I feel like that's so much at the center of why we're pushing for civilian review, is that we know that there's this code of we've got each other's backs, and the sort of gang, almost, Roberto, thinking of what you said, like a gang mentality mindset, that the police are like another gang, and you got to go along to get along, or you will be pushed aside and brutalized like Bill was.
I see Kathy's hand is up. Kathy, if you want to come off mute.
Yeah, I've had problems with police in my town, and I remember just thinking of the phrase again and again, circle the wagons, circle the wagons. And I just, that phrase echoes in my head when you tell your story. Just in so many moments of it, they were circling the wagons. I also remember I work with DYS with incarcerated youth, and some of the things that happened to those youth were, they're not treated well in those facilities always. And it scared me, and I spoke up. And what was really interesting was I worked at 2 facilities, and I was interviewing for the 3rd facility. And I would ask in my job interview, I'd say, well, how do you deal with your gangs in here? And I'd say, yeah, how do you deal with your therapy gang and your teaching staff gang and your staff gang and your, like the employees, I was labeling them as gangs. And it was really funny because they would laugh, they would pause, and then they would tell me a problem. Like this is what they always did. There was a problem. Like it was like I got it right because I worked in 2 facilities, and I knew that and it feels like you, Bill, dealt with a gang, or I don't even like to use the word gang quite, but because I've worked with the gang youth, and I don't like to put them in that category, but yeah, just that sort of they circled the wagons, yeah, and I'm sorry you dealt with that.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much,
Likewise.
Kathy. Appreciate that. And it's funny that you and Amy say that. When shortly after we got on the street, one of my fellow cadets in my class created a T-shirt that basically had a police cruiser in the center, what looked like the city of Worcester in the background, and what was written under it was 50, or with WPD, the biggest gang in town.
Ugh.
And that was their attitude, and it was pretty disgusting. So, Raphael, go ahead. You're next.
Can you hear me now? Okay, Bill, I just
Yes.
wanted to say that your story is amazing. It's, I'm sorry that you had to go through that. That's so heartbreaking to find out that the people that are here to protect us are actually not doing, what they're out here supposed to be doing. And I'm happy that you stood up and you pretty much stand for everything that the police station is supposed to be. you stand for it, which is very unfortunate. So I am glad that I am here to hear this, because I know that me myself, I know that all police are not the same, and you're the perfect example of that, So I just want you to know that, I love your story. I also was part of a program called the Spartacus program. Not sure if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
Um,
I used to
it
I used to help
sounds
run that program. How old are you?
I'm 38, and
38. You
yeah,
Hey, I
so
might have
I
been one
was
of your
in trouble.
counselors.
Yeah, I was such a troubled teen. And that
Mm,
program, like I was always getting bullied and picked on. And
mm,
that was kind of like why I was going through the trauma that I was going through. But that program, there was a person there that helped me. One time he seen that like the kids were kind of like bullying me, talking about my clothes and stuff. And the staff had took me to his house, and he gave me some clothes and made me feel better.
mm.
And it's people like you that make our community stronger. And we never forget that. Even as I'm grown now, I never have. That's when I was a child. So
Wow.
it's very inspiring to hear and see other people like this, because ever since that happened for me, I've always wanted to help my community and be a part of, change and stuff. So, Bill, it's an honor. And Roberto, same to you. It's an honor. And Amy, thank you for having me. It's definitely a blessing, and this is definitely God working.
Thank
Thanks,
you for
brother.
sharing. Yeah.
Thank you.
Gordon, I think Gordon wanted to add.
Yes, I wanted to say, everyone can hear me, right? Okay, I wanted to say first that when I came to the city, I was walking home from school and a cop stopped me and arrested me. There was no probable cause. I was just walking home, and he said that something to the effect that he didn't like how I looked, so he arrested me. Anyway, but that's my history. That was way back. But the important thing I want to say now is that I have a son and a daughter, and they went to the youth center. They started the youth center when it was in City Hall, and then they were kicked out, and then they went to across the street from the theater there, next to the courthouse. And the police the gang unit just harassed them. It was incredible. They arrested the director. The city was trying to force the Black and Latino kids, the Vietnamese kids, out of downtown, and they essentially did that. And then the youth center moved to Lower Chandler Street, and that was harassed. And they arrested the director. And then finally, they found that the youth center found a place in across from Foley Stadium, and the people seem to be happy with that. They left the kids alone, more or less. But what I'm saying is, it's not only the police; it's the people behind the police. Now, what's happening with the Civilian Review Board is, well, I'll give you an example. The city paid about $2 million to settle with the 12 Clark students. It's obvious the cop did something wrong. It's obvious they made mistakes. But what mistakes did they make? How is it going to be corrected? Who's going to tell us? And they essentially took $2 million out of my pocket, or out of all of our pockets. Well, the cops are not going to tell us what mistakes. They're going to say they have made no mistake. The city manager is not going to say. He gutted the Human Rights Commission, which had the authority to oversee the police. And the city council, they can't even enforce their own rules about chapter rule 29 and how to table an item. They're not going to do anything. They're all in conflict. They have conflict of interest with the public, and they're siding with the cops. So what's going to happen now? We're going to have bad government. This government, city government's going to rot from the top because they're not allowing an independent civilian review board to look at the cops. So what's going to happen now? They're not going to allow any review of what the city manager is doing. And there's $1 billion budget, $1 billion. And we can't even find out what's going on because the city manager is going to get in the way. The city council doesn't care, and the cops are protecting themselves. So what I'm saying is, it's more than just the cops. It's the whole system is rotting. We have to have more transparency, more accountability, and we have to have some group that's independent of the city in order to make sure that there is democracy in this city. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. That's actually a good segue to the next question, which is, so what do these stories tell us about what happens when someone believes they haven't been treated fairly, as you heard our stories and Gordon and his story, but doesn't believe that there's an independent place to go? What is that doing to people? What is that doing to those women in that DOJ report, right? I don't think it's something that we're missing in this. And to transition us, that brings us to a fundamental question which we're asking today, which is, who should be responsible for holding the police department accountable? And I want to hand it over to Bill so we can continue.
And really quickly, Amy, could we throw the slides back up? And it'll be the next, should be the next slide. Roberto, you're throwing to me. I had you next.
Oh, my apologies. We did switch that. So we want to ask y'all, who should be responsible for holding the police department accountable? We're opening it up just like we did. Maybe 2 people can share quickly. Who should be responsible? Go ahead. Yep, please.
I think the community should be responsible for holding the police department accountable. That's my opinion. They seem to be fighting oversight because they think that we can't possibly know what it means to be or how it feels to be a police officer. But I'd counter that with the police officers can't possibly know how it feels to be a targeted civilian. And I think that the civilian should be the one providing the oversight of the police department.
Can I ask a follow-up question to the whole group? But if you want to answer again, you can. What would meaningful community power look like in that space? What does that look like? Margot's hands up.
I think I'm going to defer to later. I want to tell you something about what the city is doing and what they're claiming, but I think that comes later in the conversation. So I'm going to lower my hand, but I want to say one thing now though, which is that that they put out this myth that they're there to protect us. They're there to protect people who look like me. And they're nobody in the police department will say it out loud, but the things that they said to Bill, say it loud and clear about who they're not there to protect. And also Gordon's story and your stories, that they're there to protect people who look like me. They don't like people like me who ask questions, but that's who they're there to protect. And they're very clear about that. They'll never tell you, they'll never say it out loud in a public setting, but they're very clear about that.
I agree. So I pose a question. Can an institution truly provide independent accountability for itself? I ask you, I ask the group. Is it possible for the police to police themselves? Put it in the chat. Let's do the chat. Let's do a poll. We got some no's. Okay.
Lots of no's.
A large no from Margot. Thank you, Margot.
Looks like you're
So
getting
that's
some
where the idea.
consensus.
Go
Yeah.
ahead. Yeah,
You're
it
getting
sounds like
consensus
consensus.
on the nose. No,
Yes.
nobody can police themselves. Like
On the
nobody,
nose.
right? I- When we need help with stuff, we go to other people. Can you help me with the accountability on that? I'm having trouble holding myself accountable.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. And so that's the basis for where we're going, right? That's to Gordon's very point, and Bill, when we're talking about like the civilian oversight comes in, this is where it comes in. So I want to hand it over now officially to Bill to discuss what a CRB actually is.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Roberto. Amy, next slide. All right, awesome. So, what is a civilian review board? A civilian review board basically, simply, is an independent civilian body that provides oversight over police conduct. Okay. And the important word here is independent. It's disconnected from the police department. It's disconnected from the city management. It operates on its own. And I must throw in here before we really get into it that just saying civilian review board is a very, very broad statement because there are civilian review boards across the country, probably around the world, but definitely across this country, and they're all very different from each other. A lot of the things that we look for is that independent oversight. Other things that we look for is having subpoena powers, and that can vary depending on the community and the district and the town and the state. So civilian review boards are very different. And ultimately, what we'll be looking at here in Worcester is to find and research what would be the best type of civilian review board for us. So I asked the question to folks, what do you think makes an oversight body genuinely independent? And feel free to use the chat to write some responses down. What do you think makes an oversight body generally independent? Oh, and there's some other great comments in here coming out. We're looking forward to getting to those. Yep, who is on it? Yep, difficulty of having actual legal power. That is a very important issue, Rachel. That's why we want to look at having subpoena powers in some form. Yeah, the power to put recommendations into action. That's a great one, Ashley. Yep, Margot, independent subpoena power. The question was, what do you think makes an oversight body truly independent? Yes, I have heard that, Rachel. That's one of the CCR. Well, that CCRB is one of the CRBs that we are going to be looking closely at because of that issue. Thank you. Okay, we've got a lot of great answers in there, and hopefully we'll be able to collate a lot of those for future conversations. Let's see. So to transition. Having the word civilian review board, as I already alluded to, in an ordinance is not enough. The structure and powers determine whether it actually has power. Next slide, Amy. So, what is the difference between a civilian review board and an internal affairs division? Okay. But before I explain the difference, what do folks think the Bureau of Professional Standards or the Worcester Police Department's Internal Affairs Department does? What do you think that the BOPS, the Bureau of Professional Standards, actually does in the Worcester Police Department? We can throw those in the chat. Yep, still got a lot of great answers from that previous. Nada, except harass the good people. Martha, thank you. I definitely can feel that. Okay, Internal Affairs doesn't return calls and emails if they don't want to. They find ways to cover up incidents. It's a facade for actual oversight, that's for sure. Yeah, most definitely. From what I hear and understand and have seen, the Bureau of Professional Standards is not very responsive to the public, which immediately says that they're not being, oh my goodness, they're not being transparent. I'll use that word. So definitely something that is a problem and something that we need to take a serious look at. So here's the key to distinction. Internal Affairs is part of the police department's institutional structure. And we all know that institutions oftentimes need to change. A civilian review board is designed to provide independent civilian oversight. So an important question here to ask ourselves is, if the police department is responsible for investigating itself, who is providing the independent oversight? And that answer is simply no one, because there is no one who's actually watching over the police department. It does not appear that city council or the city manager are taking any responsibilities in this area. And they are the people that besides the police chief, that the Internal Affairs Department, or BOPS, refers to. Let's see. So, let me take a look at the chat real quick. I just want to see if anything new popped up in there.
Could I also add a quick point of clarification, Bill, as well? Because
Go ahead, Josh.
I think it might be important just in the context of the council action, like the council agenda tonight, and what the city's position is, and not saying that I'm in agreement with their position in any way. I think the position that the manager's office is preparing to take this evening is that the actions that he's taken within the Executive Office of Diversity and Equity and Inclusion is an accountability layer that didn't previously exist, which is why he's saying that he's not recommending civilian review, because and it is true that the office has an investigative team that it has not previously had. However, ultimately, the recommendations that are referred out from that office go to the city manager and the chief of police. And so there is not an independent civilian accountability layer that is separate from the powers held by ultimately the city manager. But I think for folks who are planning to write testimony and attend council, like, we will be prepared to hear that message from the manager and from folks within the city.
Yeah, exactly, Josh. You nailed that one right on the head. We were actually in a meeting last night where the EODI head was in the room, and that was exactly what we were told. So very good observations, my friend. Let's see. And this brings us to why this matters specifically in Worcester. Amy, if we could get the next slide, and I will throw this to Roberto.
Martha has her hand up as well.
Oh, Martha, go ahead.
It's a sassy comment. If the system worked, then the police union chief would be fired. If the system worked, other mafia would be gone, right? And so until those folks are fired and prosecuted, the system doesn't work. And they all know those people are not hiding. They're very public, and their tactics and tools are very public. And so that was the winning argument with Frizzolo yesterday, amongst others. But like, what else do they need to know? Your system ain't working.
Thank you for that, Martha. So now we get into one of the most central questions, y'all. I see you're getting some claps. I don't know if you saw it, Martha. Just want to make sure you know. Some people are definitely agreeing with you. So we want to get into a central question, which is, why is the CRB important for accountability in Worcester? And I like to frame it by asking a question we all need to ask ourselves and be honest about, which is, are the existing accountability measures and mechanisms for the Worcester Police Department sufficient? And Martha just answered, absolutely not. So I'll also add another question, because Martha already answered my first one. So if you're a resident who believed that the police department, right, had treated you unfairly, where would you go? If a police officer had abused you as the people who bravely gave testimony in those DOJ reports that has now been silenced, would you be willing to speak to other police officers to handle that? So then why would we trust the process if the institution we're complaining about is also responsible for investigating that complaint? So why is it important? And Margo, I see your hand up, and maybe after, do you want to slide into here now, or do you want to wait for these first? All right, we'll wait.
I'm
So
sorry.
for Worcester, go ahead.
I got knocked off for a little bit, so I might have missed part of the discussion. I wanted to address the question about the accountability measures that the city is doing, because I feel like I got some significant insight into what Josh was talking about. Then I got knocked off, so I might have missed something.
So let's do. I'm going to say some of the stuff here, and then maybe at the end, if there's something that we're adding, I think you could add it then, and that would be good for the sake of everybody.
Okay,
so
sure.
I would say, so for Worcester, a CRB has the potential to put community members in the driver's seat, right, in the accountability process. But to me, and to this process, hopefully what we're keeping in mind is that especially for people who have been most affected by that policing, right? That's so that we're not just saying we want this thing, but that we're going to be mindful as to who goes to run this thing also, right? Provide independent oversight when complaints involve officers in the Worcester Police Department. It also has the ability to identify patterns, not just individual incidents, which seems to be what we're fed all the time, right? It's just a few bad apples, right? Such as a repeated complaint. So we look at racial disparities, problematic practices, not just dealing with the so-called bad apples or few bad apples, right? 4, it increases transparency, right, and public trust by making accountability visible to the community. 5, it gives residents a meaningful voice in how police and community relationships are shaped, which I think is the long-term goal here also, right? 6, create consequences and recommendations when that misconduct or police policy problems are identified, right? So that's where the accountability stuff comes in. And 7 is strengthen good policing by helping build a policing culture where both officers and residents know that accountability is part of effective public safety, right? So that people like Bill aren't pushed out. And I tell Bill this all the time. Can you imagine a world where Bill would be chief of police right now? Right? And that's the cost of us not stepping up in this moment. And so I didn't know if you wanted to add to that, Margot, or anyone else briefly, though, please, so we can stay on time.
Well, what I wanted to talk about was what we learned last night in a meeting about how the city is planning to,
please,
what they're planning to claim. This is directly related to what Josh said. So, a bunch of us were in a meeting with District 5 City Councilor, and Bill was there, and so Councilor Rivera brought along, he kind of pulled a fast one on us and brought along the city DEI officer, Kevin Levancy. And he gave us this whole rundown of what the EODEI office said when we said they don't have the authority to investigate use of force complaints. He said, well, almost all the use of force complaints have something to do with a protected class, so we can investigate it. And then if it isn't, it goes to BOPS. So that already tells you that they send things back to BOPS. But the other thing was, he said they did, he's a very skilled communicator. And I'm sure what he said is the counselors are going to eat it all up. However, what he said was, we asked him how many complaints. There were 5 in 1 year and 6 in another year of the last 2 years. Now, the Internal Affairs Office, somebody looked it up afterwards, has had over 100 complaints that are lodged in the police department. So how many of you have ever heard that there is an office in the city manager's office that investigates stuff? Anybody ever heard of that? Okay, so they're not letting people know that it exists. So the math doesn't math. The math doesn't math. So they're claiming that this office, that the EODEI office can substitute for a civilian review board and that it will do a better job. But they did 11 complaints in the last 2 years. And then when we brought up that that they had gutted the Human Rights Commission, and we have at least one former member of the Human Rights Commission here who can probably attest to this, that when the Human Rights Commission actually tries to assert the powers they have, which is subpoena power, that they shut them down. And so he said, oh, well, the problem with the Human Rights Commission wasn't that they were doing anything wrong. It was that they were spending all their time talking about policing and not doing their other work, which we had one former member of the Human Rights Commission there, and he said, no, that's not what happened. So the point is that, okay, so then if we really knew, if the public really knew that there was this place you could go, which is the EODEI office, and all of those hundreds of complaints went to them, could they handle it? Would they be able to do anything, their other work? So I think it's really important to know that they're going to do this song and dance, and it's a total diversion from what really needs to happen if you had a body that really had the power and the authority to do this stuff. And anyway, I just feel like we really learned that last night about how they're going to play it, and it doesn't math. That's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Margot. And I saw Josh and A Spring.
Yeah, something else that I'd like to uplift, and if folks haven't read through it or reviewed it, the Worcester Regional Research Bureau report, which was commissioned by the city manager to do an independent assessment of whether Worcester should have a civilian review board or not, which the Research Bureau found was their recommendation was to implement a civilian review board. One of the 14 criteria for an effective review board that they include in the report is some measure some requirement for the chief of police and the leadership to show what actions were taken following the recommendations of a review board, or in the instance of this conversation, the EODEI investigator team. Because right now, I believe the practice is the investigative team makes a recommendation to the chief, and the chief and the city manager ultimately have the say on what happens with that recommendation. What we don't have any visibility into is what the chief and what the police department are taking as from the recommendations and how they are implementing them or not. And so that is something that I think is a really critical request as part of this, is to be getting a very clear line of action from the department as to what recommendations they're taking, how those are being implemented, and what kind of structural change those things are activating.
Thank you, Josh. A Spring, Rachel, and Gordon.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick reply to Josh and say that getting some sort of number to be able to go off of how effective these things are I think is critical. And I don't know that we'll ever get that type of data from the city, given the structure that we have of government right now and how things are kind of working under this like monarch, as somebody said last night at the MLO meeting, of the Plan E type of government that we have. Margot, I just wanted to clarify, did you say that, if I'm right, you said that the Office of DEI has investigated like 5%? They said that they investigated, they said that most.
They told, so we asked them how many cases they had adjudicated in the last 2 years. 1 year was 6 cases and the other year was 5 cases. So somehow,
but that is like,
nobody
like
knows
100 internal investigations,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they've done a really good job of keeping it secret that they even have this thing. And,
well,
and they don't.
He said most, right? You said that Kevin Levancy said we investigate, or most complaints are some sort of like DEI based complaint. But then in the same breath, I hear that only about 5% of these internal reviews have gone to the DEI.
So somebody has to, no, it doesn't automatically go to EODEI. Somebody has to, I don't know what the process is for somebody going to EODEI with a complaint. They've kept it a really good secret as to what it is. So it's possible that nobody knows that they can even make those complaints, that they can even lodge a complaint there. And that's how they're showing that, oh yeah, we're handling what's coming to us, but they're not. It's a really big secret of how you get there.
Thank you. Rachel?
Hi, everybody. This has been really informative. Excuse me, I led a trauma training Tuesday last month, and I was really excited to be joining you all. As I think Amy mentioned kind of at the beginning, have a real sort of specialty in research when it comes to police sexual violence, which of course I know has come up a lot and Worcester's experience of the Worcester Police Department, of course, in that DOJ report, and I know like anecdotally many other experiences. As I'm hearing you all discuss this sort of concept and feasibility of a civilian review board, there are like a few questions I wanted to not necessarily even have anybody like specifically answer, but to like consider as you're thinking, especially I know that you all have to go to your city council later and take all this information with you. And these might be things that come up, which is, as we're discussing these other committees and these other sort of very small groups that are often sort of hidden from the public and people are unaware of the fact that you can file complaints to them, thinking about what are the types of abuses of power that you all want a civilian review board to be reviewing, I guess. So that's to say, a lot of civilian review boards in other cities are more so targeting sort of broader sort of patterns that come through like civilian lawsuits that are being examined in a police department. Whereas, I've heard a few people mention this notion of, okay, well, where do people, like individual people, go if they have experienced abuse or harassment or violence at the hands of a police officer? And those two things, very practically, in terms of what a civilian review board would do on a daily basis, are quite different. One is a lot more sort of examining patterns, much more legal, much more rooted in sort of assessing, again, like broader civil lawsuits. And one is a lot more social work. One is a lot more sort of like working with individuals who have been impacted by police abuse. And of course, police abuse looks really different depending on that context. So something to consider is, would this civilian review board only accept complaints from people who have faced excessive use of force? Are you also going to accept complaints of from folks who have experienced police sexual violence. If they've been, raped on duty, are you accepting reports if they've been raped off duty? Would you be accepting reports of women who don't trust the Worcester Police to investigate their complaint of domestic violence against a Worcester police officer? Because again, those are layers of where do you go if you do not trust the police to police themselves, if you don't trust your police department to, in fact, investigate their fellow officer. Can somebody who's experiencing domestic violence at the hands of a police officer still go to a civilian review board and feel like they are included in this advocacy? And again, there aren't necessarily like right or wrong answers to any of these questions, and they're really complex, and especially the very beginning of conceptualizing a civilian review board, so that's kind of brand new. But I have a feeling, particularly as how resistant your city manager and city council have been to a civilian review board, that these type of like logistical, practical questions might come up. And I think it's important to consider, particularly as oftentimes civilian review boards, as important as they are to have this semblance of external accountability, are often legally empowered with very little actual oversight or accountability of police officers. So again, I don't think there is necessarily any right or wrong answer to any of those questions, but really, I think important things to consider as you think of these questions of where do people go if they do not trust the police department to protect them.
Thank you for that. Wisdom is very appreciated, honestly. Is there any way you can drop some of those into the chat so that they
Yeah,
live
absolutely.
somewhere?
Yeah.
That would be great. And Gordon, we have about a minute each for you, Gordon, and then Tom.
Okay, great. Listen, first of all, the police misconduct records are public information. There was a court order regarding this in 2021, and I was able to get the police misconduct records for the last 3 years. 2, there is no way that you can file a complaint with the Human Rights Commission at this time. The director of the Human Rights Commission won't even meet with people. And there is no process that you can file the complaint. You have to essentially just make up a complaint process. Third, Margot was talking about some agency or group or department inside of the manager's office. I didn't quite understand what it is. She was using an acronym. I would ask Margot to put that in the chat, exactly the name of that group, that organization or group or department, and who she contacted, who's in charge of it. If she could do that, that'd be great, because I want to follow up on that. And that's all I have to say at this time.
Thank you, Gordon. Appreciate it. And I think she's working on it. Tom, 1 minute. You're muted.
Oh, there I am. Tom Rita from This Week in Worcester. I've been reporting in the city for 9 years or so. So the city, right after the DOJ report came out, the city manager announced a hotline or a line to lodge complaints, and that is run by the Executive Office of DEI. So that is one source for some of the cases that they look at. I think as somebody else pointed out, though, their jurisdiction is pretty narrow, and if it's not involving discrimination, bias, etc., it's going to get kicked to BOPS. There's minimal signs that BOPS is the internal investigation unit. There's some minimal signs that it's a little bit better under this chief, but I mean, it has an extraordinarily long record of doing absolutely nothing. The Telegram reported in, I don't remember when they reported this, but they reported that the city told the Post Commission in 2021 that it had investigated 795 unreasonable force or excessive force complaints and sustained 2 of them. 2 of 795. And if you look in the report that the city put out for, disposing of the review board, the report they did on civilian review boards, if you know what you're looking at, if you know it on page 11, They make it more complicated than it needs to be. But of between 2018 and 2025, there was 102 civilian complaints about excessive force. They sustained one. So, I would say that it seems that our city council thinks that, somewhere around 99% of the city are liars. And be right, because I mean, how do you not do further inquiry into something when you look at it and go, oh, well, one of 102, that's roughly 1%, right? That's a big red flag. You at least want to look into that. It could be true, but you at least want to look into that because it statistically seems rather improbable. And of course, the issue with the DEI office doing investigations is that all goes to the city manager, and not necessarily this city manager. Any city manager has a vested interest in things not becoming public, right? Because that just makes their life hell, and that's the job. But so my issue with this approach is it's all in-house, which is all designed to, of course, keep things quiet. Because we have too many counselors who treat the patrol officers union like they are their clients rather than something they should be accessing oversight of. This conversation wouldn't be as necessary if we had a city council that did any oversight, but they're absolutely allergic to it. Because that would be doing stuff, and they don't like to do stuff. Because then they have to say stuff, and they can be held accountable for that. And that is why they put the manager out to take all the bullets. I don't know necessarily that Eric Batista is as against civilian review boards as the report that came from his administration might indicate. But he had no choice but to give them that report because there's 8 votes against it. He gives them a report that says we should do this. He would probably be gone already because they have a very strong vested interest in aligning with the patrol officers union. So I just want to kind of shed some light here. This is systemic problems, both in city government and in the police department. And the whole CRB report is kind of framed on, well, the last 3 years things have been better. They have been. He's a much better chief than we've had. But what happens when he goes away? And where was our city councilors that were there before him, who were then telling us that they told us before we had him that we had one of the best police departments in the country. And now, since he's been here, it's been a lot better. Well, that doesn't all work together. They just say things that is politically expedient. And they don't have a shred of authenticity amongst the 8 of them, quite frankly.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate everybody's energy. So the bottom line, CRB is important because accountability requires independent community oversight. So police should not be the only ones policing the police. And for Worcester Interfaith, I would frame it even more broadly. We're not simply fighting for a CRB. We're fighting for a different relationship between police and the community. One that's built on transparency, accountability, trust, and a shared responsibility for public safety. And I just want to nail home this one last point, and I want to transfer over to Bill. Accountability isn't just about what happens after something goes wrong. It's also about building public trust before something goes wrong. This is a good place to emphasize that community police relations require transparency, trust, and accountability again, not simply more contact between the two groups. I will not invite and not just contact between the two, but just a transparency, a trust, and an accountability. And now I'd like to invite Bill back in to talk about the powers of a CRB.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Roberto. And next slide, Amy. All righty. So what powers would a civilian review board need to hold the Worcester Police Department accountable? Imagine that Worcester creates a civilian review board tomorrow. What happens if it can only make recommendations? You also have to take into consideration, does that give it real power? Okay. And for that power, we're going to need things and answers to things. So what does a CRB need access to? Things like police records, complaints, civilian complaints, investigative files that have been created as a result, any relevant evidence that was procured, and policies and procedures about police operations and what was actually done in a particular incident. Okay. So that begs the question, what authority does it need? What are some possible answers to that? What authority do you think we would need for a civilian review board to be powerful in this city? And we can drop those in the chat if folks would like. Once again, what authority would the civilian review board need to be effective? What do folks think?
Yeah, I've got a couple things coming in the chat. Right. CRB needs power to investigate and address the roots. Yeah.
Any more before we move on? Because I have a few answers for you.
Got another answer in the chat. A CRB needs their own lawyer / an outside attorney, enforcement, authority. Thank you all for these thoughtful responses.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no nails in the coffin, as it were. Some others.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Kels.
Yep, I've got one more in the chat. The Worcester Regional Research Bureau report stated that it isn't effective unless there is buy-in from the community and elected officials.
Exactly. Yep, I would agree. And I would also add to that the police chief and the police department. Awesome. So some possible answers: independent investigations, okay, subpoena authority so that we are able to access all kinds of records and transcripts and body cam footage and things like that, which typically needs to be done through subpoena and not necessarily public records. The ability to compel testimony or have documents where legally authorized. Public reporting of incidents. Okay, that's a very important feature. And probably one of the most important features is that people need to feel comfortable being able to report and know that they have access to this reporting portal. So as you know, we have seen here, and it has been discussed already today, people don't really know that the Executive Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion does take complaints. And as we've also seen with those number of complaints, we actually had this conversation last night. If memory serves, we had tens of thousands of calls a year annually to the police department. So if you're getting tens of thousands of calls and all you're receiving is 6 complaints one year and 5 complaints another year, there's definitely something wrong. There's no way that any police department is squeaky clean enough that you're getting only 4 or 5 complaints a year out of tens of thousands of calls. The ability to make findings and make recommendations, that will be very important, and recommendations that will actually be followed through on. And a meaningful response requirement, somebody already mentioned this, from the WPD and the city leadership, after during a case and after a case has been resolved, a meaningful response from the powers that be as to what happened and what the results are is going to be very, very important. Excuse me. So a critical organizing question: what happens when an oversight body doesn't have the power to get the information it needs? What do folks think? What happens when an oversight body like a civilian review board doesn't have the power to get the information it needs? Yep, investigations fizzle out. Nothing changes.
the fizzle and the change or nothing changing are definitely true. There's also this vague in between where no one does anything, right? Yeah.
Very much so. Great call, Kels. Who's the chat? Yeah, that's very true, Kara. People who file complaints can also become targets, an unfortunate offshoot of all of this, and that would hopefully be something that with the information, I'm always a big proponent of, if you do enough investigation of something and come up with all this evidence and information, and then somebody is immediately targeted by someone else, chances are that it was because of all that evidence you collected. And if you have it, hopefully you will be able to bring it through the proper channels and actually be able to defend against that kind of action, and then hopefully keep it from happening in the future. Yeah, Amy, we have seen people targeted for speaking out. Peter, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, I want to say thank you for having this conversation. This is a really important one. Something I put in the chat, but I think we may not be able to address it necessarily in one call, but it's something to at least food for thought for further conversation. Is I think culture matters a lot. Culture is literally the foundation that what you're seeing, the results you're seeing, whatever they are. So tolerating retaliation or not is part of the culture. Supporting officers who are people of color or not that's culture. How people get evaluated and promoted that's culture. I mean, and it's when no one's looking, the behavior that people do when no one's looking, that's rooted in culture.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Peter. One of the conversations that I have with folks is the origins of our modern law enforcement. Modern law enforcement, a big piece of it came from the slave catchers that were created after the first Africans were brought to this country to work as slaves. And those organizations were tasked with not only catching slaves, but protecting white slave owners' properties and businesses and things along those lines. And they worked hand in hand with the extreme racism that was created, where Africans were demonized, told all kinds of untruths about them. And those untruths and the culture of policing have carried through for 407 years since the first Africans stepped onto this shore to become slaves. And so that culture, Peter, you're exactly right, is ingrained in this country. And there's a racism, I believe, in police departments in general that still carries over to this day, like it does in every other, field that we have here. So it's definitely something, and there's so much more to it. I mean, we could do a whole Trauma Training Tuesday on the culture of law enforcement. There's actually a lot of great information out there about it, but you definitely hit the nail on the head there. So let's see here. Ultimately, finally, a board without meaningful authority can become a place where people bring complaints that don't actually change the balance of power. So that's definitely something that having a civilian review board would hopefully eradicate. All those complaints would be taken seriously and not left to the again, I lost a word. Pardon me, my memory is getting really bad lately. But the lack of moving on incidents, by the police department. So, Amy, next slide, and I will hand this back over to Roberto.
All right, so this is the part that I like because we shift. Let's shift from presentation to let's start to organize. This is where we move from what a CRB is to what we can actually do about it. So we all know that there's a meeting tonight, and we'll talk a little bit more about concrete things. But I wanted to ask the group that who needs to be at the table to make sure this works. And I hope that after we spent this time together, that our number one answer is community. And so then I present two questions. One, how do we make sure community members and not just institutions that traditionally have not been inclusive of community shape what this looks like? And two, what would it take for city council to understand that this isn't just a policy discussion? It's a community demand for accountability. So because ultimately a strong CRB will not be created simply because we have the right policy, we have the right words that come together. It will be created because an organized community demands it. And so we in this virtual space, I hope we're all on the same page, demand it, and we want it now. And I want to hand it back to Bill as we begin to wrap up.
Certainly. Thank you very much, sir. To that end, I just had a thought that I want to throw out there is that we do have, for folks who don't know, a lot of folks that are here today do know, there is a loose-knit organization of folks that are falling under the moniker of the Civilian Review Board Coalition. And it started quite a few weeks ago and is not going to stop based on whatever decision happens tonight, whatever way it goes. Definitely members of it plan to move forward, continuing this discussion and creation about the creation of civilian review boards. So if folks would like to get involved with that, definitely drop your name and information in the chat, and we will get you hooked up with that. And we will move on to the, did I say next slide yet, Amy? Slide 12, I believe. Awesome. So wrapping up, the three questions that we want to look at: what does real accountability look like? Okay, and what would it take to build genuine relationships between police and the community? And I'll pause there to say that I think that's one of the most important things that we need to be doing. One of my other hats is working with the organization Love is the Answer, which was created out of an incident of our executive director being stopped one too many times for walking while Black in his predominantly white neighborhood in Howard County, Maryland. And what he has done is created this whole movement around not only identifying that there's a problem, but being able to bring police and the community together so that they are able to continue to have conversations with each other, be able to break bread together, have coffee together, make community gardens together, paint murals together. Besides coffee and food, maybe all of these things take time. Or if you look at it, doing coffee over every week, over and over and over again, having a meal every week and doing that over and over again, or a cookout or a pancake breakfast or whatever. When you're doing activities like this and you get people to genuinely show up, and that is a difficult ask, to ask people in the community to come and be together with police, and conversely, police in general have a hard time wanting to be in community with the community. So those are important things above all else, I think, that need to happen, even besides having a civilian review board, is making sure that we take a look at how can we improve the relationships between police and community. And it goes without saying, I think we haven't said it enough, is that there are amazing police officers on the job. Myself notwithstanding, there were many officers on that job that I love and respect to this day. And I've watched them work, and they have maintained that ability to be human and humane with people on the street, no matter what the situation is. And it's not a matter of us just getting those people in the room with us when we are doing these activities. It's getting some of the outliers who maybe don't understand or don't believe, and bringing them in slowly but surely, but I believe it can happen. And finally, what are we willing to organize together to make it happen? And I think that will go back to the Civilian Review Board Coalition, that we will be doing work that will be moving on into the future. And this, if this is an issue and an item that is not going to die anytime soon. So we came here talking about a civilian review board, but I hope we're leaving understanding that a CRB is part of a much bigger conversation. It's not the finish line and only one answer to the problem of police accountability. We should be looking for other ways to improve the relationships between the WPD and the greater Worcester community, especially its communities of color. If we want safer communities and greater trust, we need both accountability and better relationships. That means creating ongoing opportunities for residents and police to listen to one another, build those relationships, and then address any concerns before they become crises and work together to solve those problems. So a stronger system should include independent civilian oversight and accountability, real opportunities for residents and police to build relationships, neighborhood-based problem solving, really important, neighborhood-based problem solving, which I think can be an extension of the community meetings that we already have. I don't want to use the word crime watch. I'm not sure if people are using a different word now, but that was the word that we used back then. I don't particularly care for it, but those organizations would be great starting points that are already gathered and having conversations about their communities and their districts around the city. I think that would be a great place to start. Another would be transparency and public access to information. It should not be that hard to get any information that is made public, as several people have already referred to. It's public information. There shouldn't be any pushback when any one of us or any group of us go out to access it. We also need training that strengthens cultural understanding and communication. Another big problem is that people don't necessarily know each other. And if they don't know each other, they won't talk to each other and communicate with each other. And if they don't communicate with each other, there's no way that they can understand each other. So understanding those cultural differences, and as Peter, mentioned, the police, law enforcement is a culture in and of itself. People in community are different cultures of themselves, whether it be race, creed, color, and all the other things that go with it. Those are all things that if we move to understand them with each other, and this goes beyond the police community relationship, if you go and make the effort to reach out to someone who is different than you for whatever reason, and you've heard different or bad or slighted things about them, ask the question, hey, I would love to learn more about you and XYZ. That's a great way to start a conversation that I think ends up in people understanding each other, especially in a cultural aspect. And finally, clear ways for residents to raise concerns and see them addressed. It doesn't do us any good if people, one, don't know where they can go, but having a place to go if they raise concerns or make a complaint and then they don't hear anything. I've seen several people remark that oftentimes they're contacting the different agencies we have in the city, the police department and maybe the DEI office and who knows where else, but they're calling and leaving emails and they're not getting responses. That's uncalled for. In any way of life, that's uncalled for, but especially if it's concerns raised by the community and residents of the city in and about the police department. So 3 closing questions. What does real accountability look like? And we have plenty of time here left. If people want to throw in the chat What does real accountability look like to you? And what do you think it could look like here in the city of Worcester? What do folks think? And Kelsey, if you could keep an eye on the chat as I'm bouncing between tabs here.
Happy to, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you. What does real accountability look like?
To me, it looks like transparency, open dialogue. This is something that concerns me most, is the lack of back and forth communication between, the community at stake and the police, and in general, the city of Worcester.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Ashley. Absolutely right. Anyone else? What does real accountability look like?
People have said it before, but we haven't gotten any accountability from the things that the DOJ report outlined. We know that women in our community were sexually assaulted. We know that small instances were escalated. We know that there was racial profiling and policing, and we haven't moved the needle on any of, like, nothing has come of it. And that to me is what feels so maddening, to just feel like it's not just us saying it. We had an investigation. Like, they put so much time and effort into that investigation. Here's the results. And the police have done nothing but invalidate those results, brush them off. We haven't really, no one has even said, like, we're sorry this happened to people in our community. We want it to be better. No words like that have been spoken. It's all been about covering for it and making excuses. And it's just so frustrating and harmful, psychologically harmful. It's harmful to the mental health of our entire community that this is a situation we're in.
Yeah, no doubt. Exactly, Amy. Thank you very much for that. And Roberto chimed in, taking action after something has happened. Exactly. And Amy had previously written in, real accountability, as Martha had said earlier, would involve people being taken off of the force. And ultimately, there are probably quite a few people who don't need to be there. We have several that we've remarked about in our conversations with the Civilian Review Board Coalition. And, hopefully that'll be something that down the road, people take a little more seriously, take us a little more seriously about. Peter Lynn Marcus, accountability includes having a real relationship with the community and being a part of it. Exactly. A relationship meaningful enough that people will not be one to disappoint and will be their best selves. And Margot said it would help if settlements came out of the police pension funds or their salaries. And I hear that does happen in some communities across the country. So that definitely would be something that we can take a serious look at. I don't know exactly who it is. Samsung SMX218U. Do you have your hand up?
So I don't know that that's me. So one of the things that I wanted to say, this is something that I've been promoting and teaching for a long time, is there needs to be psychological vetting. There's a particular personality that goes into these spaces, and you can see it in the culture.
Yeah.
I think that there needs to be a screening process that's like very basic. And that just makes sense for policing, for teaching, for many of our institutions. There needs to be a particular psychological vetting, and there needs to be a particular understanding of human nature. Imagine like not understanding human beings and going into a job that does not require you to have human development as a background, to have basic psychology understanding as a background, basic biology as a background. So those things matter.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree with you 100%. And I've been a big proponent of wanting police departments to actually take a look, or cities and towns in the state to take a look at recruiting folks with degrees in the things you just mentioned, so that they're not only educated or have an interest in law enforcement, but are also educated about those things, human development, psychology, sociology, all those other things. Is an officer that I will need to check my notes on who works down in the Cape area, who does have a degree in something along those lines. And she is also a police officer, and as reported, has been a major asset in bringing more accountability to the police department, as well as being able to handle situations that maybe would be a little bit different, like mental health issues and other things like that police are actually responding to. Having somebody who has the ability to be a law enforcement officer and have a handle on mental health awareness, I think would be a very good tool. And to your point, and somebody else would have to verify this for me, I know that when I came through with the city and with the state, there actually is psychological evaluation, which then begs the question, what is it they're checking for? Are they only checking for the extreme? And then if they're not, then the culture, you have to look at culture. It's culture that they're allowing people to get on the police department who are doing what they're doing now with no impunity. The psychological evaluation to be damned. So definitely an important part. Thank you for bringing that up. And thank you for being here today. It's always good to see you.
It's good to see you too, Bill. If I may spend 30 seconds saying this, in January of 2024, I happened to be on the scene accidentally and not as a professional with about 8 police officers who were trying to talk down a man who had had psychotic breaks in the past. And there were like 2 or 3 officers ready to violently pounce on this man. And the other officers were just taking my lead. I was sitting there with the 25-year-old social worker who was not very experienced. I actually knew this person very briefly. And my background in trauma, I was able to have a conversation with him and talk him into the ambulance. It took me about 45 minutes, but I watched like 3 out of the 8, it's like 8 or 9 police officers ready to pounce. They wanted to take out their stuff on this person. And then the other ones were available to be peace officers, to like support this situation. And so there's never been a more stark, for me, I've witnessed this over and over again, the people who actually can do protective work that have the psychological skills versus those who just are like trying to transmute their own pain and have never done any work on themselves. Like we need to vet that stuff. It was an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. Unique experience. But by the way, thank you for being you, by the way.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And when are you coming to Worcester? Because you just hit the nail. You hit several nails on the head with one hammer. So you you nailed it right there. The difference between the 3 and the 5 officers who maybe have been in attendance. That's a perfect example of it. And finally, what are we willing to organize together to make it happen? And I really want to open this one up because we do have the Civilian Review Board Coalition going on here in Worcester. And part of organizing is getting more and more people educated and involved. So what are people willing to do to help organize to make things happen here in Worcester in and around a Civilian Review Board and more improved relationships between community and police? Who's got something for me there? Feel free to throw up that hand or open that mic and let's hear it. What are we willing to organize together to make it happen?
I think we've already said it, but like we're gonna need to be in it for the long haul. It's not a one-time thing. And I know people here have been really active already and will show up tonight. But I think it's gonna take continued scrutiny, continued energy on this topic. And Bill, you've been at this for decades, and it feels like we haven't really been able to move the needle. So just, I guess, keep on keeping on and bring in more people in.
Sure thing. No doubt. And you're exactly right. And I got to say, I feel a different energy now that I have never felt before. And I'm hoping that it is something that's going to take us over the top and actually get us going in a better direction. Margot, go ahead.
There we go. So I've spoken a lot, so I'm going to try to be brief. We need to be led by the people who are most impacted, but there's a role for those of us who are not impacted because of what I said about the police, that what they see as their job is to protect people who look like me. So those of us who are in those positions need to be having community conversations with people who don't see that there's anything wrong with what the police do, because their experience has always been that the police protect them. So I think it's really important to think about how to create those conversations. So Surge, which is showing up for racial justice, which is organizing mostly white people to reach out to other white people to be part of a movement for racial justice. It has taken this on as a commitment. And so if you're a white person who wants to figure out a place to plug in to be part of having those conversations, let's see, put your email in the chat, or I'll put the email of Surge Worcester in there and you can contact us, because that's a piece of what we need to do.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Margot. That is definitely a very important piece. Josh, go ahead, brother.
Thank you, Bill. I have two things that I would offer to the room and to folks in our networks and conversations that we have. I think ultimately the thing that is going to make the path to doing this lighter and easier and more collaborative is electing aligned folks to city council and school committee. We need to change the leadership and the representation of the city to be in agreement that this is what we need in our city, and we need to elect progressive folks that are going to stand behind these values and run on these as campaign issues. The second thing that I would offer is that I believe we need to aggressively pursue charter review and charter change in the city to make our government more representative of the people. I mentioned this in the chat, but the Worcester Regional Research Bureau that did the report on civilian review said that their recommendation for the most kind of weather resistant way to implement civilian review is to include it in the charter and actually build that into the governing documents that guide our city. So those are the two things that I'm particularly passionate about and working on, is electing progressives to lead our city, and electing progressives to lead our city who also believe we need to change our charter and system of government. So those are the two things that I would offer the room. Thank you.
Awesome. Josh, thank you so very much. Very well said. Glad to have you on the team and in arm in arm together in this fight. Okay, I'm going to pass it off to my brother Roberto again, and Amy, next slide, please.
Nice. So everything we talked about today, really comes down to one question that I have in mind, which is, are we willing to show up to Brother Bill said, show up and use our collective voice? And so tonight, before we start to ask, if folks have questions tonight, the city council will hear from the community. So your presence matters. In conclusion, we all have several asks for this group. And one, show up. If you can be there tonight, be there. If not, if you're able to speak up and you're willing to speak, please do so. Tell your story and explain why independent accountability matters to you. If you can't speak, then number three is bring someone who can. If you can't attend, help us reach someone who will attend. If you can't be in person, show up via Zoom. You could go to city council via Zoom and speak through Zoom. And number four, I'm going to drop a link in the chat. We are also collecting pledges of people that are voting. This election year is super important. And so please fill out the pledge. And if you can make it tonight, please make it tonight. But if you can help us canvass a phone bank and step out of your comfort, you could do it. You could certainly phone bank from your house, which is great, but I'm going to share the link now. And so please fill out, just say, hey, I am going to vote this year. But if you want to fill out and say, hey, I'd like to come help out Worcester Interfaith reach its 5,000 pledge goal, that would be fantastic as well. And last thing, please remember that one person can raise a concern, right? But organized people can change policies, right? So let's make that happen. And I appreciate you. And if there's any questions, we'd like to open it up for that. You could share the QR code too, or scan it if you're on your laptop with your phone and do it that way also. Any questions, or that Bill and I do such a wonderful job that there's no questions to be had?
Amy, you could throw that slide up for a little bit longer.
Of course, you did such a wonderful job. No doubts about that. Thank you for leading us in this conversation today. I don't think no questions is not a sign of a bad job here at all. It's a lot to sit with. This is heavy stuff. It's big stuff, and it really feels like there's no wrong way approach. You know, if you just take the next right action for you, we can collectively move the needle a bit.
Ooh. And I just noticed the typo in my phone. It's actually 3411. It ends in 3411. I'm not sure if I can actually change that live as we're sitting here. Let me go give it a shot.
And if not, that was it. We appreciate y'all time.
There we go.
Hope to see some of y'all tonight.
Thank you so much, Bill and Roberto. That was really a great deep dive into the topic. I really appreciated hearing both of your experiences and so much wisdom and knowledge in the room. If there's anybody else, I know like Nellie's got expertise in this issue and hasn't spoken yet. If there's anyone else who wanted to talk more or share what they know about what's happening in Worcester and the process, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you. And yeah, so many, I will see so many of you tonight, I'm sure. Anything else that didn't come up or wasn't shared or wasn't spoken about? I think it was really great to hear from Margot and Roberto and Bill about what the city's strategy is likely to be and the ways that they're going to say, we don't need this. And hopefully people feel better equipped to speak to why we do in fact need this. Tom, if you want to say more, I know you have really extensively studied this issue. You've written about it. You're being sued by the police union. And so you have a whole different level of expertise and lived experience here. And we'd love to hear from you if you'd like to share anything else. Jillian as well, everybody. Go ahead, Tom.
I have complete confidence in total victory. Because it's laughable on its face.
Laughable.
Laughable. No, I think I got everything out earlier, but thank you.
Hi, this is Nellie Medina.
Oh, Nellie, yeah.
Yes, yeah. So I'm really concerned about the youth violence within the police department, what they've done to our youth. You know, I think it's a 7-to-1 ratio with arrests. Right now in Worcester, we are filling up half the jails. They did a study in 2023 where they determined that 47% of all the kids incarcerated throughout the Commonwealth are from Worcester, Latinx from Worcester. And that's sure a lot higher now with ICE. I did talk to one mom who said when they took her 17-year-old boy, she was reluctant to call anyone because she has a 9 and 11-year-old at home. And so we know that there's a lot going on in Worcester with the police department and our youth. I feel like their presence has been extra at all the after-school programs. They actually spent a whole week at the Boys and Girls Club this year, which I wasn't aware that was going to happen. However, I think more has to be done before they just go in. I think they have to create a really strong bond with our communities and the parents. And I'm also concerned that any of these officers who are accused or who have, engaged in rape, right, of our sex, our folks in the street or any kind of violence towards youth are not, whitewashing, right, their record by engaging with our youth, because I don't think they should have access. And then another big thing where we're going to need everyone's support. Roberto and I, there's a few of us here that are working on a data request. Worcester Public Schools has reported 0 arrests from the years 2024 to 2026, school-based arrest. But we know from reading in the paper that there's been at least 7 or 8. And so the Worcester Police Department is complacent in that as well. So we're going to do a records request of the Worcester Police Department. And we're going to need folks to sign on because we want to know, right? We need to keep our kids safe, and we can't do that if we don't know what their interaction is with the police and how the schools are involved and complacent and not demanding accountability in that area. Thank you.
Awesome, Nellie. Thank you so very much. And I saw Kathy R had her hand up. You dropped it. Did you still want to say something?
Oh, well, I just want to say a couple of things. I've tried to fight the police about accountability, and I've also tried to fight the Department of Youth Services, the juvenile correction system, and it's a long battle. So I wish you well on this marathon because this is not a sprint. I know from experience. I also fought for a long time. Kelly's comment made me think of it, for transparency and racial data collection in the juvenile justice system, because when you collect data, then you can prove racism and then you can get action taken. And it just never went through, and there's some success in that. But some departments working successfully on that. And I'll email Kelly if I can find the information on who's doing some work on that. Maybe she could partner with them in Worcester. But in general, people don't want to collect data on things that make them look bad. So yeah. So I fought for 10 years for that law, and then I realized it wasn't going through.
Awesome, Kathy. Thank you so very much. And maybe last but not least, I saw Melanie, you had your hand up. Did you have one last? Oh, you're muted.
Unmute. So I didn't actually have anything particular to say. I don't know why my hand was up. I just want to appreciate everybody who's been there from these very different perspectives. I think that we are looking at policing like we're looking at all of our systems in the way that they are allowed to exert power over others without like cause or like reasoning or authority. Like legitimate authority is absent in our systems. The cultures are the problems. I think Kara was speaking to that a lot in the chat, that the culture is the problem. I spoke of, there was a 12-year period here where we had an SRO in Somerville Public Schools who was in the high school, positioned in the high school, where all of the police officers knew he was an addict and a dealer. He was dealing drugs in our high school. And
Wow.
because he was the cousin of Joe Curatone, who just left the mayor's office in 2022, they were all afraid to say something because of the retribution that they would face. And it was a brave police officer, someone who's like a brother to you, Bill. His name's Joseph something, and I can get you that name. And he landed in the DA's office, but he did the thing and he risked his pension and he shouted out, like, we need to talk about this. And that's the only reason that drug dealer was out of the high schools. The SRO officer was the dealer in the high schools in Somerville for over a decade because the police culture was too afraid of our mayor. Imagine all of the kids that were subject to that. And imagine if you had been that SRO. The difference.
I know. I imagine it. I imagine it.
I started
all
my
the
career
time.
in high schools and teachers, and so the SROs matter. And like I don't actually think that police officers belong in school systems. I just don't. I think they're kids. I think we need to teach them restorative practices. Like I don't want to be offensive. I don't believe police officers belong in that environment, but the police officers that are there, that like if we have the system, they make or break things. Who they are, the personalities. They make or break it. Yeah.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, I'll throw it to you, Roberto.
So that's it. Appreciate y'all. Thank you for coming out. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you all so much.